Hi, I'm Rachel. Well, last Friday came and went, and I did not update with a AM reading announcement because, as usual, I'm never really where I want to be quite with my reading. It just seems like I'm always playing catch up. But I wanted to get something out to talk about what I've been up to. I have things to share, so I'm calling this my midweek check-in for April 10th, 2019, because that's accurate to when this will be going up. So I'd meant to finish Sadness is a White Bird by Moriel Rothman-Zecher in time for my March literary newsletter. I put up a monthly literary newsletter on my reading and writing blog, but it turned out really not to be the case. I was still going at this. And meanwhile, I had a book in my library's Overdrive, an audiobook that was about to expire on the 5th. And so I went ahead and I listened to that before, putting it in the end of my newsletter and putting up my newsletter this week, which I will link down below, the newsletter. So the last book was Queen's Shadow by E.K. Johnston, which is a Star Wars book in the vein of the new canon. Well, this one actually is more of just in line with the prequels. It's about Padme Amidala, and it kind of bridges the divide between her life as a queen and her life as a senator, because there is that 10-year gap between the first two movies of the prequels. And I'll go ahead and say I'm part of the 5% of Star Wars fans who likes the prequels. and I really like Padme Amidala, and I like these books. There's another one about Leia in her formative years. These books that focus on the young women of Star Wars and the young women of the Skywalker family, kind of. And they're both very political, and so they're not so much about, badassery in a Jedi way, but they are about the political arena and making your mark there. And this one kind of gives credence to some stuff from the Clone Wars, and I never actually was that interested in watching the Clone Wars, and now I might be. It's kind of silly. There's a lot of telling and not showing what's going on. It's a young adult book, but I really enjoyed it. I like the character. I love Naboo, which seems to be my utopia world. It's very feminine and matriarchal. They're mostly a bunch of young queens who then leave office and become artists and farmers and domestic workers, and none of that's looked down on. It's just a very peaceful place. So I'm like, I want to move there. So anyway, I really liked it. I mean, it's for what it is. I really enjoyed the book for all of the geekery and revisiting characters that I love. Anyway, after that, my first official read of April would be Sadness is a White Bird, which to blow everything out of the water, this was amazing to me. This is my first book that made me cry of the year. Last year it was Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. This one was because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I started to tear up a bit when our main character Jonathan was going into the army, and his Palestinian friends were texting poetry to him about, the travails of being on the battlefield and what that costs people, costs the soldiers, and costs the people he's against, because obviously one of the major parts of military service in Israel has to do with the occupied territories. And Jonathan actually ends up serving there because he has an interesting story. He grew up in America, although his grandfather grew up in Israel, and I believe he was born in Israel, but then his parents moved back to America, but his father was from America. But anyway, Jonathan got it into his head that he wanted to go back to Israel, and it was partially inspired by some anti-Semitic bullying he received at school, and he wanted to buy into the idea of Jewish strength and not being and not cowtailing to victimhood anymore. So he got involved in Jewish youth organizations and ultimately returned to Israel for his final year of high school so that he could go into the army. And he particularly wanted to go into the paratroopers, and so an active military unit. But his mother ends up meeting a a Palestinian woman, or technically a Arab citizen of Israel, when they are protesting something. And from there, Jonathan's mother and he go to visit this woman and her family, and that's where he meets this woman's two twin children, a boy and a girl, or a man and a woman, because, you know, they're college age, and strikes up a friendship with them. And this is pretty rare in Israel, not completely unheard of, but Israelis and Palestinians tend to live pretty separate lives. But Jonathan grows incredibly close with these two siblings, and they have a pretty intense emotional relationship. Part of it is sexual with the girl Nimreen. Actually, part of it is sexual with both of them. There's a sort of fluid sexuality going throughout this book, which I found rather intriguing, the way that Jonathan was rather openly sexual with a lot of the men in his life too, without, you know, officially coming out as gay. But and some of that too had to do with his own backstory and his own great uncle who he lost in the Holocaust, and also had a lover, or at least a crush, and that kind of comes to play when he goes to Greece, where his family was from, before he joins the army. Because that's one thing Zecher does in this book, is that he gives voice to the grandparents' generation, to the grandparents of Lath and Nimreen, the Palestinian kids, and their grandmother was forced out of her village by the War for Independence, or the Nakba, and she also was witness to some horrible war crimes that the Israelis committed, and destroyed part of her family. And then meanwhile, Jonathan's grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. He left his town in Greece and came to British Mandate Palestine, but the rest of his family was killed. And so the story deals with both of those things, that both of these people, both of these groups have been wronged by history. There's a lot of question about who has the right to the land, but everybody has been persecuted and thrown off of land, and including Jews of Mizrahi descent, which Rothman-Zecher also gets into when Jonathan is on duty in the occupied territories, and one of the Palestinians is saying, "Why don't you all go back to Europe?" And Jonathan's thinking, "Well, some of the people in my unit are from Iraq," and things like that, and were thrown out when Israel was created. I mean, this this book to me was already code red emotions for me. This is a conflict that is very close to my heart in a frayed, emotional manner. So maybe to that degree, I'm biased in saying that I love this book, because I was always going to be emotional about it. But I think that he did a really wonderful job at showing how the conflict is complex and everyone is human. But I think a major part of what he did was to create a situation where people on enemy lines, as it were, see each other not only as human, but as friends. And just how different the entire conflict would be if Jews and Palestinians had this contact with each other. I'm a little iffy on the ending, which might be keeping this book at 4.5 stars for me right now. I feel like, in a way, Jonathan's condition becomes sort of a stand-in for the fraught political and social issues that the author is trying to convey, so that it's like he kind of becomes less of a person and more of an idea. Maybe that's a little bit nitpicky, and I'm especially grateful that something I thought happened, which it would have been a little too melodramatic and unbelievable for me, didn't end up happening that way. So I don't know if I'm being too hard on this whole idea of Jonathan as the person versus Jonathan as the idea of the author, because ultimately I think he comes across as believable. I don't know. I'm still kind of grappling with that part of it, although I still found the whole thing overall to be incredibly moving. So yeah, this was great. But maybe even better than that, I'm about 130 pages into A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza, which I'd been wanting to read for a while, and then I finally got off my butt and got to it, because It's part of the BookTube Prize put on by Robert from Barter Hordes and a bunch of other booktubers as judges, and the prize is trundling along, and this was one of the books on the long list that caught my attention, so I decided it was time to read it. This is a literary fiction novel about a Muslim American family of Indian descent. We open at the oldest daughter's wedding, where she's invited her estranged brother to attend, and that's a bit of a prologue to set up the idea of family tension. And then so far the book has gone back in time, not linearly, but we jump between time periods kind of at random, it almost seems like to me, with either the brother Amar or the sister Hadia or their mother as POV characters so far. They also have another sister, Huda, but she isn't a POV character as of yet. But it just has been highlighting their lives, you know, out of order, but still getting a huge gist of who they are as people and what their lives are like in their community as Muslims and as Americans. And I love all of those layers of complexity. And I really love Mirza's writing. I think in a way it reminds me a lot of my own, because it's so rich in character and relationship conflict, and it's not something that is the best writing ever. I mean, the writing is fine, it's not bad writing, but this isn't a book about the writing, it really is a book about the story, and it's really, you know, pulling me in. And I mean, I don't think this is living up to the hype, but then again, I think it's going to be one of my favorite books of the year, so I'm really just nitpicking. So I really just want to read this book forever and not go to work, and so that's where I am with this. The next book that I just started and intend to go through slowly, let's go through everything slowly though, is Zelda by Nancy Milford. This is a biography of Zelda Fitzgerald, and I am reading this because of one of you. Because about a month ago I was talking about my Fitzgerald reading project, where I wanted to read Zelda's novel and also the remaining novels I hadn't read of her husband, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I did read all of those novels in March, and I actually have a post on my reading and writing blog about his legacy and what I think of the book, so I'll link that down below. But anyway, thanks to Lindsay Reeds on one of my posts, she talked about reading this biography and how that helped her to understand and appreciate Zelda's own novel better. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting, and I'm always intrigued to read biographies, and so I thought I should also give this book a try. And so far I've only read one chapter, and I read it really late at night, but I guess I only have good things to say so far, because even though I was actually really exhausted and kind of falling asleep, I was still very intrigued by the narrative. I guess I think Zelda's going to be an interesting character to follow. I feel like I've only known her so far in the women of F. Scott Fitzgerald's novels who are based on her, and it seems like she is as lively and rambunctious in person in chapter 1 as she appears to be in fictional form. So, so far I'm rather engrossed in the story of this character, so I hope that will continue. And thank you so much, Lindsay Reeds, for bringing this book to my attention. And finally, looking forward to the future, I have this book. This is The Selected Poems of Langston Hughes. I actually read one of these poems in my last video, where this weekend I went to the tidal basin in Washington, D.C., and to one of our monuments, that of Martin Luther King Jr. He has a monument right next to the tidal basin, and so there's a bunch of cherry blossom trees in bloom all around it right now, and so I wanted to combine cherry blossoms and the monument to show people DC in the spring, and also National Poetry Month. And what do you know, I have this collection of poetry. I actually got this book in an interesting way. For the last few years in September, the DC Public Library has done this banned books hunt, where they take 6 books that have been banned either in the US or abroad in whatever situations on a theme, and last year's theme was about activism, and they hide them in various local businesses and library branches. They all have specific covers that indicate that they're part of the game. I took the cover off so you can see the real cover of this. So anyway, that's how I found this book in September, and now I figured I'd want to get around to reading it because it is National Poetry Month. And I don't read a lot of poetry, generally speaking, but I at least try to, push myself into reading one collection in April. So that's what I'm doing with this. And I'm hoping I'll enjoy this and have it under my belt at the end of the month. So that about covers it for me now. I now seem to be in rapid fire video making mode because I hope to be back tomorrow to do a video on the Sammy Rohr Prize announcement. The Sammy Rohr Prize is a prize for emerging Jewish writers, and I've been covering it and reading books from the finalist lists of all of the years that it's been going on, and so now I'm really excited to talk about this year's 5 finalists and try to think of who might win. It's fiction, so close to the heart. And then I hope to get a Friday Reads video out actually on Friday. Or at least I hope I make some significant progress with what I have in front of you, but there always seems to be too much to do in a day, but this reading is really calling to me right now, so let's keep at it, girl. So thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.